The dusty main street of Copper Ridge fell silent as Elena Martinez walked past the general store, her hand instinctively resting on her barely visible belly. Behind lace curtains and wooden storefronts, eyes followed her every move. The whispers had started 3 weeks ago, spreading through the small Texas town like wildfire through dry grass. Elena kept her chin high, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, her calico dress modest and proper. She'd lived in Copper Ridge for 2 years now, working as a schoolteacher in the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. The children loved her, the parents respected her, but now everything had changed. "Poor thing," Mrs. Henderson murmured to Mrs. O'Brien at the fabric shop. "No husband, no family. What will become of her?" "She'll have to leave town," Mrs. O'Brien replied, shaking her head. "No decent woman can stay here in her condition. It's a scandal." Elena heard the whispers but refused to acknowledge them. She had her reasons for silence, secrets that burned in her heart like hot coals. The father of her child was powerful, influential, and completely off-limits. She would never speak his name, never burden him with her situation. That afternoon, as she taught arithmetic to her students, the door burst open. There stood Clayton Thornton, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe, his steel-gray eyes intense beneath his black Stetson. "Miss Martinez," his deep voice commanded attention. "A word, please." The children gasped. Clayton Thornton never came to town during the day. His vast ranch, the Double T, sprawled across thousands of acres to the west. He was a legend, tough, fair, but fiercely private. Elena dismissed her students early, her heart pounding. When the last child scampered out, Clayton removed his hat, turning it in his strong, weathered hands. "The whole town is talking," he said quietly. "I know." Elena's voice was steady despite the trembling in her chest. "You need to marry. Soon." She laughed bitterly. "Who would have me now?" Clayton stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "I would." Elena stared at him in shock. "Mr. Thornton, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he interrupted. "I understand that you're alone, that you're scared, and that you're trying to protect someone." Tears pricked her eyes. This proud, powerful man was offering her salvation, but it felt wrong to accept charity, to trap him in a loveless marriage. "I can't let you sacrifice yourself for me," she whispered. Clayton's jaw tightened. "It's not a sacrifice." He paused, his eyes boring into hers. "Elena, there's something you need to know." Before he could continue, the schoolhouse door opened again. Sheriff Tom Bradley stood there, his expression grave. "Clayton, there's trouble at your ranch. The Martinez fence line, someone's cut it, cattle are everywhere." Clayton cursed under his breath, but his eyes never left Elena's face. "We're not finished with this conversation," he promised, settling his hat back on his head. "Not by a long shot." As he strode out, Elena sank into her chair, her mind reeling. What had he been about to say? And why did his offer of marriage feel less like charity and more like something else entirely, something that made her heart race and her carefully guarded walls begin to crumble? Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with rain. The town's whispers continued, growing louder with each passing hour. But Elena Martinez had no idea that the biggest storm was yet to come. By Saturday evening, the entire town had gathered at the church social, the biggest event of the month. Long tables groaned under the weight of pies, roasted chicken, and fresh bread. Lanterns cast warm pools of light as families mingled, but the atmosphere felt charged, electric. Elena almost didn't come. She stood at the edge of her small cottage, debating whether she could face the stares and whispers. But pride straightened her spine. She wouldn't hide like she'd done something shameful. When she walked into the churchyard, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Women clutched their husbands' arms. Men shuffled their boots in the dust. Elena moved toward the food tables, determined to act normally. Well, I never, Mrs. Henderson said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The audacity of some people. Maybe she should think about moving on, another voice added. Before she corrupts our children with her loose morals. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for a plate, but a strong hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. She looked up into Clayton Thornton's face. "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Mr. Thornton, I don't think." "Dance with me, Elena." The small band had started playing a waltz. Clayton led her to the makeshift dance floor before she could protest. His hands settled on her waist, warm and possessive. They began to move, and Elena felt every eye in Copper Ridge fixed on them. "They're all watching," she whispered. "Good," Clayton replied, his voice low and fierce. "Let them watch. Why are you doing this? You're only making it worse for yourself." His gray eyes softened. "You think I care what these people say about me? I've built the biggest ranch in Texas from nothing. I've faced down rustlers, droughts, and Comanche raids. You think I'm afraid of gossip? But you don't owe me anything. Elena." He pulled her slightly closer, his voice dropping to a rumble only she could hear. "When are you going to stop being so damn stubborn and listen to what I've been trying to tell you?" Before she could respond, Reverend Matthews approached, his face stern. "Mr. Thornton, I don't think this is appropriate. Miss Martinez's situation." Clayton stopped dancing but didn't release Elena. He turned to face the Reverend, and the crowd that had gathered around them. "Her situation?" Clayton's voice rang out clear and strong across the churchyard. "Let me tell you about her situation." "Clayton, don't," Elena pleaded, her face burning. But he was beyond stopping. He'd kept silent for too long, watching her suffer alone, watching her bear the weight of secrets that should never have been hers to carry. "This town wants to know who the father of Elena's baby is." Clayton's voice rose, commanding, powerful. "I'll tell you." The crowd pressed closer. Mrs. Henderson gasped. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his hand on his gun belt, as if expecting trouble. Clayton pulled Elena against his side, his arm around her shoulders protective and unmistakable in its claim. His eyes swept across every face in the crowd, daring anyone to challenge him. "I am," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "I am the father of her baby." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. What was he doing? Why was he claiming responsibility for something that wasn't his burden to bear? But Clayton wasn't finished. "And tomorrow," he continued, his grip on Elena tightening as she swayed against him, "she's going to become my wife." Chaos erupted. Women fainted. Men shouted. Reverend Matthews stammered something about propriety and proper bans being posted. But Clayton ignored them all, sweeping Elena away from the crowd toward his waiting horse. "What have you done?" Elena gasped as he lifted her onto the saddle, then swung up behind her. "Clayton, you can't just lie." "I'm not lying," he said quietly, spurring the horse forward into the darkness beyond the churchyard lights. They rode in silence, Elena's mind reeling. The Double T Ranch house appeared on the horizon, a sprawling structure of adobe and timber, lights glowing in the windows. Clayton didn't stop there, though. He guided the horse toward a small creek, hidden by cottonwood trees, where a blanket of stars stretched overhead. He dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. In the moonlight, his face looked carved from stone, but his eyes held something that made Elena's breath catch. "You remember last September?" he asked quietly. "The Harvest Festival in San Antonio?" Elena's heart stopped. You knew." "I've always known, Elena. From the moment you walked into that dance hall in that green dress, I couldn't take my eyes off you." The memories flooded back. She'd traveled to San Antonio to visit her cousin, had gone to the festival on a whim. There'd been music, dancing, and a tall stranger in a fine suit who'd asked her to dance. They'd talked for hours, walked along the river, shared dreams and secrets. One magical night when she'd felt like someone else entirely, free, alive, desired. "You said your name was Clay," she whispered. "You never told me you were Clayton Thornton, the cattle baron. You never told me you owned half of Texas. And you never told me you were the schoolteacher in Copper Ridge, my town." A small smile touched his lips. "I looked for you, Elena. 4 months. I went back to San Antonio a dozen times, but your cousin had moved, no one knew where you'd gone." "I didn't know I was pregnant until Christmas," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "By then, I thought I'd never see you again. I thought that night was just a beautiful dream." Clayton cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "When I saw you in the schoolhouse that first day, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to tell you who I was, wanted to claim you right then. But you looked at me like I was a stranger." "I didn't recognize you," Elena admitted. "In San Antonio, you were clean-shaven, dressed in city clothes. Here, you're the powerful rancher everyone fears and respects." "I waited," Clayton continued, "thinking I'd find the right moment. Then I heard the whispers. Saw you suffering alone. And I realized you didn't know, couldn't possibly know that the man from San Antonio and the rancher Clayton Thornton were the same person." Elena laughed through her tears. "All this time, I was protecting you, from yourself. And I was trying to protect you, watching from a distance, making sure you had everything you needed." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I should have told you sooner. I should have claimed you and our baby from the start. The whole town will think you're lying to save my reputation." "I don't care what they think," Clayton said fiercely. "I care about you. I care about our child. That night in San Antonio wasn't just magical for you, Elena. I fell in love with you before the moon set." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. True to his word, Clayton had arranged everything. Reverend Matthews stood in the small church, still flustered but unable to refuse the most powerful man in the county. A handful of witnesses gathered, Sheriff Bradley, Doc Henderson, and surprisingly, Mrs. Henderson, who'd arrived with tears in her eyes and an apology on her lips. Elena stood in the vestibule wearing a simple white dress that Clayton's housekeeper, Rosa, had altered overnight. Her hands trembled as she held a bouquet of wildflowers that Rosa had picked at dawn. "You don't have to do this," she whispered to Clayton one last time. "Even knowing everything, you could still walk away. People would understand." "Elena Martinez," Clayton interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, "I've been waiting to marry you since September. I'm not walking away now, not ever." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Clayton slipped his mother's gold ring onto Elena's finger, she saw tears in his eyes. When he kissed her as his wife, the small gathering applauded, and even Reverend Matthews smiled. Outside the church, more townspeople had gathered than Elena expected. Mrs. O'Brien stepped forward first, shamefaced. "Mrs. Thornton," she said carefully, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We judged without knowing, spoke without understanding." Clayton's arm tightened around Elena's waist, but she stepped forward, gracious in her triumph. "We all make mistakes," Elena said softly. "What matters is how we move forward." Over the following weeks, the truth, or a version of it, spread through Copper Ridge. Clayton and Elena had met months ago, had fallen in love in secret, knowing their different social positions would cause talk. They'd kept their relationship quiet, not wanting to create scandal, but love had won out. The town chose to believe it, chose to celebrate it. After all, who didn't love a romance between the powerful rancher and the beautiful schoolteacher? Elena continued teaching until her pregnancy advanced. The children drew pictures of babies and asked endless questions. The other teachers welcomed her warmly, and the parents who'd whispered the loudest now brought gifts and offered congratulations. At the Double T Ranch, Elena discovered a new life. Clayton was gentle and attentive, renovating the entire east wing of the ranch house for the nursery. He'd come home each evening, dusty and tired from the range, but his face would light up when he saw her. They'd sit on the porch at sunset, her hand in his, and talk about everything, their dreams, their fears, their plans for their growing family. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one evening as autumn painted the hills gold. "That our story didn't start differently?" Clayton pulled her close, his hand resting on her swollen belly where their baby kicked strongly. "Our story started perfectly, with a magical night when I met the woman I'd love forever. Everything else is just details." When their son was born in early spring, he had Clayton's gray eyes and Elena's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after Clayton's father. As Elena held her baby in the big ranch house, watching Clayton cradle their son with such tender strength, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The whispers, the shame, the secrets, all had led to this moment of perfect happiness. The town had whispered that she was expecting. The powerful cowboy had declared himself the father. But the truth was simpler and more beautiful than any gossip: two people who'd found love against all odds, who'd fought through misunderstanding and fear, who'd chosen each other again and again. And they lived happily ever after, on the Double T Ranch, where their love story had finally found its home.